The stingray's barb pierced for the 7th time, and the 16-year-old Maya prince's cry finally distorted into something otherworldly. Blood pooled beneath him on strips of bark paper, each drop a toll paid to gods who never seemed appeased. His shaking hands guided the barb through yielding flesh, not out of derangement, but through the most sacred rite his civilization recognized. The thorny cord lay waiting, coiled like a serpent beside the jade altar. This was not an act of torture. It was an audience with the universe itself. Within the smoke-laden temple chamber, priests observed with calculating gazes. One misstep, one tremor too many, one refusal to persevere, and this young royal would forfeit more than his claim to the throne. He would lose his cosmic standing, his inherited right to exist within the noble order. The deities watched through the haze, through the crimson flow, through the very foundations of the sanctuary. They demanded proof that this burgeoning prince could bear the weight of leadership. His name was Itzama, and in 3 hours he would either ascend as a divine monarch or retreat as an insignificant figure. The rope commenced its passage through the lacerations the barb had opened. How did an entire civilization construct its societal framework upon ritualized genital bloodletting? And why did adolescent males vie to endure the most extreme sexual mutilation their bodies could withstand? To comprehend this blood-soaked theology, we must journey back through a millennium of Maya history. Back to the era when humanity first grasped that their gods were ravenous, perishing entities requiring perpetual nourishment, and that the most precious sustenance was human agony, freshly extracted from the most intimate regions of the body. The preparation commenced 3 weeks prior to the initial drawing of blood. Young Itzama had abstained from solid sustenance for 10 days. His stomach had transcended mere hunger, entering a peculiar state of vacant lightness that rendered the world's periphery indistinct. He was confined to an isolation cell beneath the temple. Absence of light and sound, save for the steady drip of water, had dissolved the boundaries between wakefulness and slumber. By the time the priests retrieved him, he could not discern whether the serpents depicted on the walls were painted or alive. However, the hallucinogenic effects were only just beginning to manifest. The morning glory seeds, meticulously counted, 13, always 13, had been pulverized with cacao and intermingled with venom, carefully extracted from the sacred toad. Itzama ingested the concoction as dawn broke over Copan, his ancestral city, his proving ground. Within moments, the stone visages etched into the temple walls appeared to animate. Their eyes tracked him as the priests escorted him to the bloodletting chamber. Herein lies the deepening darkness. This was not merely a test of virility or a demonstration of worthiness to rule. The Maya held a profound, desperate conviction that without these offerings of royal blood, the sun would not rise on the morrow, not figuratively, but literally. The cosmos was a failing mechanism, and the blood of the nobility was its sole propellant. The inaugural barb originated from a stingray captured in hallowed waters during the new moon. It was longer than a man's hand, serrated like a saw, and imbued with the power to bridge realms. Itzama was compelled to guide it himself. No priest could offer assistance, nor could any divine intervention ease its path. The deities sought personal commitment. What transpired next would dictate the kingdom's destiny. The barb was inserted just below the glands of his penis, propelled forward with deliberate slowness, not so rapid as to betray cowardice, nor so tardy as to imply hesitation. The pain possessed a tangible quality, texture, color, sound. It tasted of copper and resonated like bronze bells. Blood began to flow onto the bark paper positioned below. Each droplet formed glyphs that the priests would later interpret as divine missives. 6 more instances. 6 more piercings, each at a distinct angle, culminating in a corona of wounds. Between each insertion, Itzama was required to intone the names of his progenitors. He had to invoke the deities using their concealed appellations. He had to maintain lucidity despite the shock threatening to submerge him. Other noble youths had faltered at this juncture, succumbing to fainting spells, vomiting, or outright refusal. They survived, yet as spectral figures, forever branded as lacking the fortitude for divine responsibility. The rope was not yet finished with him. 3 arm lengths of maguey fiber, each strand laced with thorns no larger than fish scales, yet sharp enough to ensnare and rend. The rope had steeped for days in the blood of sacrificed quails, in honey, and in the nectar of psychoactive fungi. Now it would traverse the wounds the barbs had created, dragging its myriad minuscule teeth through channels of raw tissue. Itzama exerted his strength. The priests chanted. The stone visages on the walls seemed to part their lips in silent screams or expressions of ecstasy. In his altered state, he could not differentiate between the two. The rope moved through him as if alive, akin to a fiery serpent, or the umbilical cord linking him to the very nexus of existence. His vision fragmented into intricate patterns of light. He perceived the gods awaiting beyond the fabric of reality, their hands extended for their due. The blood on the bark paper had coalesced into patterns, now conveying messages of impending drought and conflict, of the necessity for captives, of which neighboring polities would fall and which would endure. Itzama's blood was scripting his kingdom's future. Every drop held consequence, every moment of torment translated into divine insight. This rite, the Exosulcui, the flower song, marked merely the commencement of a young noble's engagement with sacred suffering. Should he prevail and the gods accept his offering, he would engage in variations of this throughout his life. Prior to engagements in warfare, during periods of drought, at the birth of heirs, each instance, the implements would become more formidable, the bloodletting more profound. But why? Why would an entire strata of young men compete to endure such grievous mutilation? Because within the Maya cosmology, celestial power emanated from hardship. The individual who could withstand the greatest suffering, who could provide the gods with the most abundant sustenance through his pain, would command not merely legions, but the very forces of nature. Rain would answer his summons. Hostile armies would retreat before his divinely charged presence. The cosmos would conform to his will, having proven his willingness to meet its demands with the most intimate currency imaginable. If adolescent princes endured such trials for dominion, consider the sacrifices made by their queens for the sake of prophecy. Lady Ixchel bit down upon the leather strap as her attendants presented the cord. The Queen of Yaxchilan had observed a 20-day fast, subsisting solely on bolch, a fermented honey beverage infused with the bark of the sacred tree. Her tongue, swollen from ritualistic preparations, protruded between her teeth. The jade basin positioned beneath her chin awaited its contents. Unlike her consort's public bloodletting, this ceremony would take place within the inner sanctum, observed only by the marble effigy of the goddess Ixchel. The cord had been specially fashioned. Not the thorn-encrusted instrument employed for male genitalia, but something far more refined and dreadful, a cord woven from human hair, each strand harvested from a woman who perished in childbirth, intermingled with fibers from the psychoactive morning glory vine. The thorns affixed to it were derived from the sacred sabal tree, each no longer than an eyelash, yet sharp enough to pierce the veil between existence. What followed would determine the kingdom's fate. The initial passage of the cord through her tongue opened a conduit not solely through flesh, but through the very fabric of reality. Lady Ixchel's attendants had pierced the organ with obsidian awls, creating a fissure that wept blood and saliva. Now the cord would be drawn back and forth. Each motion widened the wound, while the thorns snagged and released. Blood inundated her mouth, hot, metallic, pulsating with power. She could neither swallow nor expel it. It overflowed the jade basin, splattering the bark paper spread beneath her knees. Yet this was not mere bloodletting. It was Kuhul Bark, the sacred opening. And through her perforated tongue, the utterances of the divine would emerge. The vision serpent first materialized as vapor. Copal incense mingled with blood-soaked paper, burning incensers, conjured ethereal forms that defied natural cohesion, but nevertheless persisted. The serpent's head emerged from Lady Ixchel's own mouth, born of her blood and agony. Its body coiled upwards towards the chamber's painted ceiling. Its scales were fashioned from celestial bodies. Its eyes reflected the genesis and demise of progeny. From its jaws emerged the figure she sought, an ancestor deceased for centuries, his mouth opening to impart prophecy. However, we are not yet at the apex of the ordeal. The cord had to maintain its movement. Even as visions overwhelmed her consciousness, even as divine voices flooded her awareness, Lady Ixchel's hands had to sustain the cadence. Pull through, reverse, pull through. The thorns had transformed her tongue into a labyrinth of lacerations, each a minuscule aperture murmuring its own invocation. Blood courged down her chin, her chest, collected in her lap, where the bark paper captured every effusion. These female bloodletters sought not the temporal authority of kingship, but something far more potent, the capacity to communicate with irrefutable divine sanction. When Lady Ixchel emerged from this chamber, her prophecies would direct military endeavors, determine royal succession, decree the fate of captives, and dictate the offerings to the altars. Her pronouncements, born of blood and suffering, would carry greater weight than any monarch's decree, for they originated directly from the divine. This gendered division of bloodletting illuminates a crucial aspect of Maya cosmology. Men bled from their phallae, the nexus of procreative potential, the symbol of earthly dominion. Women bled from their tongues, the organ of speech, prophecy, and divine communion. Both acts were inherently sexual, involving the most intimate and vulnerable parts of the body. Both demanded that the practitioner consciously embrace torment in pursuit of celestial connection. Herein lies the truly harrowing revelation. The blood was not merely an offering, it served as a conduit. The Maya believed that blood, particularly from erogenous zones, contained Kul, the divine life force animating all existence, from humans to the stars. As Lady Ixchel bled from her tongue, she generated a substance capable of transmitting messages between realities. The bark paper beneath her did not simply collect blood. It recorded a dialogue with the cosmos itself. The vision serpent coiled ever tighter, its maw gaping wider. Through it, Lady Ixchel perceived the future. armies marching, cities aflame, a great drought approaching that would necessitate unprecedented sacrifices. She foresaw her own demise, peaceful and honored. She witnessed her daughter taking up the cord and needles, perpetuating the tradition. All this prescience flowed through the wounds in her tongue, each revelation exacted by another pass of the thorned cord. Upon the ritual's conclusion, Lady Ixchel remained voiceless for days, her tongue, so swollen it was unrecognizable, rendered sustenance impossible. Yet the bark papers, now dried and meticulously preserved, contained wisdom that would guide Yachilan through the impending crisis. Her physical voice had been temporarily silenced so that the voice of the universe might resound through her. Her attendants assisted her from the chamber, her legs unsteady from blood loss and visionary experiences. The following day, the king would consult her prophecies and formulate his strategies accordingly. Wars would be initiated or averted based on her visions. Lives would be preserved or forfeited according to the divine will articulated through her violated tongue. These individual sacrifices were but droplets feeding an immensity, for the Maya universe was in a state of daily decline. Every sunrise was a miracle purchased by someone's suffering. The Maya did not perceive the cosmos as a stable, eternal construct. They viewed it as a terminally ill patient reliant on life support, and that life support was sustained by human suffering. This was not figurative language or primitive superstition. It was observed reality, validated by a millennium of theological calculation. The cosmos was entropy personified, and only through continuous infusions of cool, the divine life force, could the descent into oblivion be momentarily forestalled. Consider the gods as mechanisms requiring specific fuel, not benevolent creators resting after their labors, but desperate entities locked in perpetual conflict with chaos. The sun god, Kinich Ahau, expired each night, literally died, and required resurrection through blood sacrifice to battle his way across the sky anew. The maize god was perpetually dismembered and needed human suffering to reintegrate. Even the rain god, Chak, particularly Chak, demanded tribute before releasing his life-sustaining waters. But why blood? And specifically, why sexual blood? The Maya creation narrative offers the explanation, and it is a concept far more disturbing than modern minds can readily accept. In the beginning, the gods masturbated the universe into existence. This is not crude mythology, but sophisticated cosmological theory. The primordial god pierced his phallus with a thorn, and from the resultant bleeding, mingled with semen, emerged the primal waters. The goddess Ixchel received this bloody effluence, and from it she gave birth to the world. Creation itself was a sexual wound that never healed, a perpetual leakage of Kul, the divine life force, at a catastrophic rate. Now, here is where the narrative descends into genuine darkness. Imagine your electricity bill being settled with pain. The Maya meticulously calculated the precise exchange rate between human suffering and cosmic equilibrium. A drop of ear blood might sustain a star for an hour. A pierced tongue could power the moon for a night, but genital bloodletting was the premium currency. The pain was more acute, the symbolism more resonant, the cool extracted more pure. The mathematics of suffering were exact. Priests maintained meticulous records, documenting which types of bloodletting yielded specific outcomes. They discerned patterns. Droughts concluded following royal penile bloodletting. Enemy incursions ceased after queens bled from their tongues. Crops flourished when children offered blood from their earlobes. To them, this was not coincidence, but cause and effect, as incontrovertible as dropping a stone and observing its descent. Remember, these were not irrational individuals. They were accomplished astronomers, capable of predicting eclipses centuries in advance. They were engineers who erected cities that still stand today. They were mathematicians who independently devised the concept of zero. When they asserted that the universe required blood for its sustenance, they did so with the same unwavering certainty as we affirmed the Earth's orbit around the Sun. The sexual dimension was not arbitrary. The Maya understood that sexual energy and life force were inextricably linked. The same power that engendered life could sustain the cosmos, but only when offered willingly, consciously, with a full comprehension of the celestial transaction underway. A penis was not merely an organ, it was a conduit for creative energy. A tongue was not solely for articulation, it was the channel through which divine wisdom flowed. These organs were selected because they represented the most direct connection to the cool, that prevented the very dissolution of reality. Their discoveries fundamentally reshaped their societal structure. If the universe demanded constant sustenance, then a dedicated cadre was necessary for this provision. Not everyone, as that would be inefficient, but a specialized class of noble providers, trained from infancy to endure maximum suffering to extract maximum cool from their own bodies. These were not victims, but cosmic technicians, as integral to Maya civilization as power plant operators are to ours today. The obligation continued to escalate. Each generation determined that greater quantities of blood were required than the preceding one. What began as occasional royal bloodletting evolved into scheduled regimens of pain. What commenced with willing nobles expanded to encompass captives, enslaved individuals, anyone with blood to offer. The cosmos was a voracious deity, and its appetite intensified with each feeding. The Maya worldview becomes comprehensible only when this fundamental point is truly grasped. They believed with absolute conviction that without continuous blood sacrifice, the sun would not rise, the rain would not fall, the crops would not mature, and the universe would revert to the primordial darkness from which it originated. Every dawn represented a triumph purchased with agony. Every rainfall signified a divine response to human suffering. Every successful harvest attested to the efficacy of the blood offerings. This was not faith but empirically observed reality, corroborated by centuries of correlative analysis. When bloodletting decreased, calamities intensified. When sacrifices were amplified, prosperity followed. The Maya had discovered, or believed they had discovered, the very operating system of reality, and that operating system ran on blood. Thus, if the universe required perpetual replenishment, where would they source sufficient sacrificial fuel? The answer transformed the nature of warfare forever. The raiding party disregarded gold, jade, and even grain reserves. They were in pursuit of something far more valuable. Lord Smoking Squirrel of Najtun led his warriors along the jungle trails, their countenances adorned with the black of war and the blue of the hunt. They had been tracking the royal convoy from Karakol for 3 days, allowing them to advance further into the designated kill zone. This endeavor was not about territorial claims or material wealth. It was about apprehending human batteries for the cosmic engine. The Maya waged war differently than other civilizations. Cities rarely exchanged hands. Populations were not subjected to mass enslavement. Instead, warfare was a meticulously managed harvesting operation, as precise as extracting rubber from trees without causing their demise. The objective was for the enemy city to persist, to recuperate, and to nurture another generation of nobles whose blood would eventually grace their altars. Sustainable sacrifice. That was the cornerstone of long-term cosmic maintenance. However, we have not yet reached the most harrowing aspect. The ambush materialized at dawn. Smoking Squirrel's warriors erupted from their concealed positions. Yet their weaponry revealed the true intent. Weighted nets, blunted spears designed for incapacitation rather than lethal injury. Obsidian clubs with deliberately filed edges that would subdue without inflicting fatal wounds. This was not combat. It was a violent shopping expedition. Prince Katsa, scion of Karakol, fought valiantly, which only heightened his value. The more fiercely a noble resisted, the more divine life force he clearly possessed. His personal guard perished around him, but the assailants took meticulous care to ensure the prince's survival. A deceased royal was worthless. A living one could power the cosmos for months. Here the horror deepens. Both sides comprehended the established protocols. Kaka understood that if captured, he faced not immediate demise, but months, perhaps years, of carefully orchestrated bloodletting preceding his ultimate sacrifice. He would be treated with honor, provided with the finest provisions, assigned comfortable lodgings, and even permitted to participate in rituals. He would effectively become a living power source, gradually depleted to maximize its output. Some captured nobles even developed a form of Stockholm syndrome, coming to believe in the righteousness of their captor's cause. The Maya system of warfare and capture elucidates a profound aspect of their worldview. Enemy nobles were not adversaries in the conventional sense. They were colleagues in the profession of cosmic upkeep. A captured lord from Palanque held the same divine mandate as a lord from Tikal, to nourish the perpetually hungry cosmos. The sole variable was whose altar would receive the offering. Smoking Squirrel's warriors bound Kasa with cords fashioned from human hair, not as a sign of humiliation, but of reverence. These were not mere ropes, but sacred implements. Each strand was taken from a warrior who had fallen in battle, braided into a capture cord that possessed its own spiritual potency. To be bound with such a cord was to be acknowledged as a fellow participant in the cosmic drama. The calculations of capture were precise. A king was valued at approximately 100 commoners in terms of cool extraction. A royal prince might be equivalent to 50. A noble warrior, perhaps 10. The Maya did not engage in indiscriminate slaughter due to its inefficiency. Why squander precious cool by spilling it upon jungle floors when it could be meticulously collected on sacred altars? Now, recall, these were not deranged individuals. The noble captives often accepted their appointed destiny. They had been raised within the same spiritual framework, sharing a unified understanding of cosmic principle. Many approached the sacred altars with acceptance, even a sense of purpose, recognizing that their demise would usher in the dawn, bring forth the vital rains, and ensure the celestial mechanisms continued their cyclical rotation. They were devout adherents to a cause embraced wholeheartedly by both the condemned and the executioners. The journey back to Naranjo spanned 5 days. Prince Cacao Seed, encased within a ceremonial litter, was provided with sustenance in the form of fruits and sweetened water, receiving the profound respect befitting a sacred consignment. The warriors, identified by the smoking squirrels adorning their regalia, intoned the ancient flower songs, melodies of devotion and rebirth, celebrating the profound honor of nourishing the divine entities. By the time they arrived in the city, news of their approach had already circulated widely. The populace thronged the thoroughfares, not to confront an adversary, but to hail a revered figure whose sacrifice would guarantee their collective survival. This survival extended beyond the confines of Naranjo, encompassing the celestial dominion that embraced every distant star, every thrumming pulse of life, and every falling raindrop. Prince Cacao Seed was destined to join other fallen dignitaries within the temple precinct, commencing his transition into a divine conduit. His vital essence would be periodically drawn forth according to the established celestial timetable. Measured portions during the agricultural initiation phase, increased quantities during periods of aridity, and the entirety during the concluding rite, which would ensure his spirit's direct ascension to the divine realms. The brilliance of Maya martial strategy lay in its inherent resilience. By prioritizing capture over termination, by targeting individuals of high standing instead of the common populace, and by preserving conquered settlements as fertile grounds for future offerings, they cultivated a system designed for perpetual perpetuation. Warfare evolved into a predictable, almost ceremonial undertaking. City-states engaged in reciprocal raiding expeditions, ensuring a consistent provision of noble vitality without precipitating widespread devastation. Once apprehended, these human conduits faced a fate that rendered death a comparatively gentle release. A cool sensation brushed against his skin, the final tender contact he would ever experience. Prince Cacao Seed stood atop the Grand Pyramid of Naranjo, precisely 2 months after his capture. The officiating priests had been adorning him with pigment since the break of dawn, meticulously covering his entire body with the sacred cerulean hue derived from crushed clay and indigo. This application transcended mere adornment. It signified a profound spiritual transmutation. The blue coloration transformed the captives into ephemeral embodiments of Cha, the rain deity, their impending cessation of life, thus becoming not an execution, but a celestial metamorphosis. Below, in the central plaza, an assembly of 10,000 souls observed with fervent reverence. They had undergone prolonged periods of fasting, preparing their spiritual selves to bear witness to the practical workings of cosmic perpetuation. The resonant pulse of the drums synchronized with the very rhythm of life, a deep, insistent beat that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The plaintive cries of conch shells echoed like the whispers of spirits traversing the thresholds of the netherworld. This was indeed a spectacle, yet one imbued with ramifications capable of altering the very fabric of existence. Then arrived the climactic juncture. The ritual ball game had been, as anticipated, prearranged. Prince Cacao Seed had performed with exceptional skill. The divine beings demanded genuine effort, yet the outcome had been predetermined. The spherical projectile, symbolizing the sun's celestial journey, had passed through the stone aperture precisely at the moment dictated by the priest's meticulous calculations. Now he knelt before the altar, his form rendered blue, his consciousness adrift upon a potent mixture of balche, morning glory seeds, and wild tobacco. Herein lies a common misconception regarding Maya sacrificial rites. One might envision screaming individuals forcibly led to their demise. However, Prince Cacao Seed submitted willingly, even with a sense of eager anticipation. While the ingested substances undoubtedly facilitated this state, a more potent influence stemmed from a lifetime of ingrained theological indoctrination. He was poised to directly nourish the cosmic order, his lifeblood destined to flow unimpeded into the mouths of the gods. Heroes within his culture did not vanquish mythical beasts, Rather, they became the sustenance that perpetuated the beast's existence. The obsidian blade, a marvel of ritualistic engineering, had been expertly chipped from a singular piece of volcanic glass, its edge surpassing the keenness of surgical instruments. It had fulfilled this solemn purpose for countless generations. The chief pontiff, himself under the influence of the same psychoactive concoction, positioned the implement beneath Prince Cacao Seed's sternum. The intended incision would ascend and curve leftward between the ribs, culminating directly at the heart. Swift, precise, practiced. Yet the divine powers harbored alternative intentions, as was invariably the case. The initial incision parted Prince Cacao Seed's chest, but the pontiff's hand faltered in its movement. Immersed in the heightened spiritual fervor of the moment, amplified by potent hallucinogenic agents, he perceived an extraordinary phenomenon. The prince's heart appeared to emanate a luminescence, an intrinsic radiance stemming from its accumulated vital essence. This was no ordinary nobleman. He was a cosmic capacitor, charged to its absolute limit. Tears welled in the pontiff's eyes as he grasped the profound implication. He was on the verge of liberating a torrent of divine vitality sufficient to power the sun for an entire season. The extraction process concluded in a mere 4 seconds. The pontiff's hand plunged into the opened cavity, seized the still pulsating organ, and wrenched it free. The major arteries snapped with the sound of taut harp strings. Prince Cacao. Seed's eyes remained open, his consciousness lingering for perhaps another heartbeat, his gaze fixed upon his own vital organ held aloft above the pontiff's head. A deafening roar from the assembled multitude reverberated through the pyramid's very stones. Now, observe the truly grim dimension. The heart was not merely removed. It was offered to the deities while still imbued with life. The pontiff pressed it against the sculpted visage of a Cha statue, its crimson ichor flowing down meticulously carved channels designed to guide its descent into sacred receptacles. Each nascent beat conveyed vital essence directly into the divine digestive apparatus. The gods were imbibing life itself, still warm, still in motion. Prince Cacao. Seed's body, now merely an empty vessel, cascaded down the pyramid's tiered steps. Yet even this descent was integral to the established ritual. The corporeal remains would be meticulously dismembered, not for consumption as sustenance, but as sacred relics. His skull would be united with thousands of others within the Tzompantli, the formidable skull rack that functioned as a celestial ledger of accounts. His blood would be commingled with copal incense and consumed by flames, dispatching smoke signals to the heavens. His skin would be donned by the priests during ceremonial observances, enabling them to channel his noble essence. The crowd below did not recoil in horror. They experienced a profound sense of relief. The sun would rise on the morrow, the rains would descend, the cosmos would perpetuate its daily cycle of dissolution and rebirth. For Prince Cacao Seed had paid the ultimate price. Children were lifted aloft to gain a clearer vantage point, to comprehend the embodiment of heroism within their world. This was their equivalent of reaching the moon, a moment when human endeavor touched the divine. However, the removal of the heart was merely the initial phase. The body, transformed from a living individual into a sacred artifact, necessitated adherence to stringent protocols. The priests operated with the precision of skilled surgeons and the devotion of consecrated saints. Each internal component had its designated purpose. The liver was presented to the chthonic deities, interred within the temple's foundations. The brain, subjected to the purifying smoke of sacred herbs, conveyed its residual memories to the ancestral plane. The true abhorrence of Maya sacrifice lay not in its savagery, but in its inherent logic. Within their cosmological framework, it possessed absolute coherence. If one genuinely believed the universe was imperiled, if one truly held that human suffering was the sole remedy, then their actions were not merely rational, but exceptionally valorous. Each sacrifice represented a warrior perishing to safeguard the very fabric of existence. Nevertheless, the heart's removal constituted only the prelude. The subsequent handling of the remains defied all contemporary sensibilities. The priest's hands trembled, not from revulsion, but from profound reverence as they prepared the flesh. Prince Cacao Seed's earthly form, having tumbled down the pyramid, was now conveyed with immeasurable care to the sanctum sanctorum of the temple. What ensued was not cannibalism in our conventional understanding, not driven by hunger, savagery, or even dominance. This was sacred metabolization, the deliberate reintegration of vital essence through human physiological processes, effectively transforming captured dignitaries into integral components of the victor's spiritual composition. The butchery followed centuries-old, immutable protocols. Initially, the skin was meticulously removed in a single, unblemished piece, an undertaking demanding exceptional dexterity. This would be subsequently worn by priests during periods of regal succession, allowing them to embody, in a tangible manner, the divine essence of the fallen prince. The musculature was carefully segregated along its natural divisions, each section designated for distinct ritualistic functions. Nothing was rendered to waste. Every element served a cosmic purpose. Yet consider this. We have yet to reach the most unsettling aspect. The preparation methodology held as much significance as the consumption itself. The flesh allocated for ingestion, primarily from the limbs and thighs, was subjected to boiling with sacred botanicals, not for palatability, but for spiritual enhancement. Capsicum peppers were believed to facilitate divine communication channels. Cacao served to associate the repast with the sustenance of the deities themselves. Hallucinogenic fungi ensured that the act of eating became a visionary odyssey. This was not a meal, but a pharmaco-ritualistic compound administered through deliberate ingestion. Lord Smoking Squirrel, as the triumphant war leader, was granted possession of the right hand, the hand that had wielded weapons, that had issued royal commands, that had performed rituals of bloodletting. He consumed it with deliberate slowness and profound reverence, sensing Prince Cacao Seed's vital essence integrating with his own. This was not a metaphorical transfer. The Maya people believed that ingesting an adversary's flesh unequivocally conferred their spiritual power upon the consumer. One became, in the most absolute sense imaginable, that which one consumed. The distribution followed strict hierarchical guidelines. The paramount priests received the cardiac flesh, already imbued with divine energy from its sacred presentation to the gods. The war captains were allocated the musculature, thereby assimilating the strength of the vanquished into their own physical beings. The scribes were granted modest portions of cerebral tissue, granting them access to the knowledge and insights of the deceased. Even the common populace might receive a few droplets of blood, blended into their maize porridge, thus enabling the entire community to partake in the spiritual triumph. While this aspect elicits profound unease in contemporary observers, it exemplifies the inherent logic of the Maya worldview. They perceived the human body as a transient vessel for vital essence, or kur. Upon an individual's passing, particularly through sacrifice, this kur necessitated a designated destination. Allowing it to dissipate would be construed as both imprudent and sacrilegious. Through the act of consuming the flesh, they ensured that the accumulated spiritual potency remained in circulation, akin to recycling precious metals rather than interring them. This ritualistic cannibalism was not confined to adversaries. Upon the natural demise of a revered sovereign, segments of his remains might be partaken of by his successor, thus ensuring the continuity of divine authority. If a distinguished priest departed this life, his acolytes might consume select portions to inherit his accumulated wisdom. This was not an act of desecration, but rather the ultimate form of veneration, a transformation into living remembrance. Their discoveries fundamentally reshaped Maya conceptions of selfhood. An individual was not merely an isolated entity, but a composite being, an amalgamation of all those ritually consumed, a living testament to accumulated spiritual energies. Lord Smoking Squirrel harbored within him the life force of dozens of vanquished noblemen, each contributing to his cosmic gravitas. When he engaged in bloodletting rituals, he released not only his own inherent vitality, but also the concentrated power of his incorporated adversaries. The psychological ramifications were profound. Warriors who had partaken of enemy flesh fought with an almost supernatural assurance, convinced they possessed the combined strength of multiple men. Priests who had ingested the remains of their predecessors spoke with an aura of augmented authority. Even the act of opposition became inherently complex. How does one contend with an adversary who has literally absorbed the essence of one's captured compatriots into their very being? Moreover, the Maya extended this practice even further. The most exalted echelon of ritualistic cannibalism involved the consumption of portions of deities themselves, or more accurately, individuals who had undergone ritualistic transformation into divine forms. Recall Prince Cacao Seed's cerulean adornment. That was not merely symbolic. Through the synergistic effects of psychoactive substances, ritualistic practice, and collective conviction, he had indeed become an embodiment of Cha. To consume his flesh was to partake of divine sustenance, a form of communion that Christian theology, while sharing superficial similarities, would find both familiar and profoundly disturbing. The evidence substantiating ritual cannibalism is exceptionally robust. Skeletal remains discovered in sacred deposits exhibit cut marks consistent with the process of defleshing. Ceramic artifacts vividly depict the ritualistic consumption of human flesh. Most compellingly, Maya artistic representations portray this practice openly and without any semblance of shame or concealment. It was not a clandestine transgression, but a hallowed sacrament. The ultimate transformation occurred during the digestive process itself. As Lord Smoking Squirrel's physiological system processed Prince Cacao Seed's flesh, converting it into energy and waste products, the vital essence completed its journey. A portion would be assimilated, permanently augmenting the Lord's spiritual mass. Another portion would be expelled, returning to the earth to nourish the very crops that would sustain future sacrificial offerings. In this closed-loop spiritual economy, even excrement held cosmic significance. While these practices were unsettling even during times of prosperity, their true severity is revealed when considering the circumstances that arose when the rains ceased. The meticulous rituals yielded to desperate slaughter as the drought persisted into its third year. Copan had always prided itself on its adherence to established practices. The bloodletting schedules were precise. The sacrifices conformed to ancient protocols. However, as the maize withered in the fields and the reservoirs transformed into parched earth, a fundamental element of the Maya cosmic equilibrium fractured. If measured suffering could sustain the universe, what transpired when the universe ceased to respond to customary appeasements? Paleoclimatic data paints a stark picture of cascading catastrophe. Dendrochronological records indicate the onset of the drought around 820 CE. Yet this marked merely the initial phase. Diminished rainfall led to widespread crop failure. Crop failure, in turn, necessitated an escalation of sacrificial offerings to appease Chak, the rain deity. Increased sacrifices precipitated warfare to acquire captives. Warfare disrupted agricultural cycles, exacerbating famine. The feedback loop tightened with suffocating intensity. Herein lies the truly grim reality. The priest mathematicians attempted to resolve the equation. If a single royal bloodletting resulted in a day of light rainfall, how much blood would be required to terminate a 3-year drought? If the heart of one captured nobleman could guarantee a season's fertility, how many hearts would be needed to revitalize barren fields? The mathematical conclusions pointed to a single, stark imperative. More. Always more. King Smokeshell of Copan decreed the unthinkable, a mass sacrifice of his own nobility. The efficacy of the cosmic capacitor system relied upon high-grade vital essence, the divine life force concentrated within royal bloodlines. But enemy settlements were similarly afflicted by drought, hoarding their own elites. The monarch turned inward, demanding his courtiers' offspring for the altars. The first to resist was his own brother. The subsequent events would determine not only the fate of the kingdom but the trajectory of Maya civilization itself. The abandonment of ritualistic precision signaled the commencement of the end. Where previously a solitary heart extraction entailed hours of meticulous preparation, now dozens perished daily in an assembly line fashion. The supply of blue pigment dwindled, and the sacred intoxicants were supplanted by crude concoctions. The prayers became truncated, then entirely omitted. This was no longer cosmic maintenance. It was a desperate negotiation with an unresponsive universe. The archaeological evidence from Copan's final years is profoundly poignant. Hasty mass graves yielded the remains of nobles, identifiable by cranial deformation, and inlaid jade dental work. Altars became so saturated with blood deposits that they were abandoned in favor of new ones. Most telling is the complete absence of foreign captives. Copan was, in essence, consuming itself. Yet the divine entities remained perpetually unsatisfied. The escalation followed a grim, inescapable logic. If noble blood proved insufficient, perhaps the gods desired quantity over quality. Sacrifices of commoners escalated exponentially. The Tzompantli skull racks became so overloaded that they collapsed, entombing priests beneath avalanches of bone. Children were consigned to cenotes, sacred wells, their small forms weighted with stones. The nuanced theology of cosmic preservation devolved into unadulterated sympathetic magic. Water for water, life for rain. Environmental data indicates a brief respite from the drought around 823 CE, offering a fleeting glimmer of false hope. The ensuing rainfall was tempestuous, exacerbating soil erosion already weakened by deforestation. The short-lived agricultural recovery only facilitated more intensive sacrifices when the drought returned with greater ferocity. Hope itself transformed into a form of torment. Here lies the cosmic irony that ultimately shattered Maya civilization. Their proposed solution precipitated their own demise. Every tree felled for sacrificial pyres intensified erosion. Every farmer diverted from their fields for ritualistic duties resulted in reduced food production. Every noble sacrificed to the point of death meant a depletion of competent administrators. The city-states were engaging in a form of civilizational phlebotomy, weakening themselves precisely when resilience was paramount. The final inscriptions emanating from Copan, though fragmentary, offer revealing insights. King Smoke Shell, in a text dated 822 CE, claimed to have sacrificed stellar quantities of blood, likely signifying numbers so vast they could only be quantified astronomically. The last dated monument, originating from 830 CE, remains unfinished. The scribe apparently ceased mid-glyph, leaving an incomplete sentence concerning divine hunger. The pattern of abandonment illustrates a clear narrative. Initially, the peripheral residential zones were depopulated as farmers fled starvation and conscription for sacrificial rites. Subsequently, the noble quarters were vacated as elite families escaped the increasingly irrational demands of desperate rulers. Finally, only the temple complexes retained inhabitants, staffed by skeletal crews of priests, mechanically continuing rituals for deities who had demonstrably ceased to heed their pleas. Other urban centers experienced similar declines. Palenque's final sovereign sacrificed his own offspring. Tikal's priests resorted to offering animals garbed as humans, hoping to deceive the divine entities. Caracol simply ceased to record any events. Its final monuments were left blank, as if the scribes had exhausted their hope for inscription. The widespread collapse of Maya civilization was not a singular occurrence, but rather a cascade of thousands of localized apocalypses. Each city met its unique demise. The calculations of desperation led to an inescapable conclusion. The cosmic machinery was irrevocably broken. The blood tributes that had sustained the universe for a millennium had ceased to be effective. The Maya faced a theological crisis that rendered mere starvation a secondary concern. What recourse remained when the very gods abandoned them? The ruling classes were not the sole contributors to this voracious universe. Every individual Maya citizen paid a blood tax. Before dawn, the farmer meticulously sliced his earlobe, allowing drops to fall upon each maize seed. His lineage was not of noble birth. His skull had not undergone cranial deformation in infancy. His teeth bore no inlaid jade. His blood would never grace the altars of the pyramids. Yet the cosmic hunger showed no favoritism based on social standing. Every Maya person, from the sovereign to the lowest laborer, owed the universe a blood debt that accrued daily interest. For commoners like Ital, payment was rendered in small yet constant installments. The morning bloodletting was merely the commencement. As he placed each kernel of maize into the earth, a drop of his blood accompanied it, a tribute to the maize god, a plea for auspicious growth. His wife, Acna, had already allowed her blood to flow from her earlobes onto the hearthstones, ensuring the fire gods' continued sustenance of their cooking flames. Their 6-year-old son would soon make his inaugural offering, learning from an early age that existence itself necessitated a constant negotiation through suffering. Yet we have not reached the most disturbing aspect. The agricultural blood tax was precise, not an arbitrary infliction of suffering, but a calculated payment for specific outcomes. 3 drops per seed during normal cultivation, 7 drops during periods of drought, 13 drops if the preceding harvest had been unsuccessful. The blood commingled with the soil, creating a supernatural fertilizer that forged a direct link between human vitality and agricultural yield. Ital's grandfather had imparted the precise ratios, just as his own grandfather's grandfather had taught him, a lineage stretching back to the primordial humans who comprehended the insatiable appetite of the gods. Women faced their own distinct blood economics. Childbirth represented a cosmic struggle, a perilous undertaking with mortality rates that rendered every pregnancy a potential sacrifice. Akna had successfully navigated 4 births, a testament to her resilience and a remarkable achievement. Women who succumbed during childbirth received posthumous honors equivalent to those bestowed upon warriors fallen in battle. Both had shed blood in the service of perpetuation. Both had paid the ultimate price to ensure the continued functioning of the cosmic apparatus. Their discoveries fundamentally altered the understanding of daily life. Every endeavor demanded its blood tithe. The construction of a dwelling required blood applied to the foundation stones. The planting of a tree necessitated blood poured upon its roots. The commencement of a journey involved blood marked upon the path. The Maya people lived in a perpetual state of minor self-inflicted injury. Their bodies bore the markings of numerous small scars, each serving as a receipt for cosmic transactions. The implements employed were modest, yet undeniably effective. Razor-sharp obsidian shards, no larger than a thumbnail, could readily part skin with the slightest touch. Thorns, meticulously sorted by size for varying phlebotomy requirements, were sourced from specific floor. While regal individuals utilized stingray barbs, common folk made do with the fin bones of fish, the spurs of turkeys, or rudimentary stone slivers. A bloodletting apparatus was as indispensable in every dwelling as cooking utensils. Youngsters were introduced to this practice from an early age. By the age of 6, they were making modest offerings from their earlobes. By the time they reached 10, they possessed the skill to pierce their own tongues for minor ceremonial purposes. Upon reaching puberty, they were fully integrated into the blood-based economy, their very physiology generating the vital substance that sustained their societal equilibrium. The initial bloodletting ritual was a celebrated occasion, akin to a child's first utterance or inaugural step, a significant marker of their transition into cosmic citizenship. This is where the psychological toll becomes strikingly apparent. Consider the profound realization that your family's very survival hinged not merely on diligent effort, but on your capacity to endure suffering. Every crop failure implicitly suggested an inadequacy in one's blood offerings. Each ailing child served as a potential indicator of insufficient contributions. Any misfortune could be traced back to an unpaid debt in blood. The Maya people lived under the perpetual scrutiny of a cosmic ledger, their endured hardships never perceived as fully sufficient. The gender-specific divisions in common bloodletting practices mirrored broader cosmological beliefs. Men predominantly offered blood from their ears and genitalia, organs associated with receiving divine directives and procreation. Women, conversely, bled from their tongues and earlobes, these sites linked to prophecy and nurturing. Both sexes commenced their bloodletting journey with their earlobes, a training ground for the suffering that awaited them. Even enslaved individuals contributed their blood, their offerings being commingled with their owners to fortify household protection. However, the blood of commoners was not valued as highly as that of the elite, whereas a single drop of royal blood might secure a season of rainfall. A commoner's offering would only suffice for mere days or hours. This disparity fostered counterproductive incentives. Ordinary individuals were compelled to bleed more frequently and in greater volumes for comparatively lesser returns. A farmer, for instance, might deplete a substantial portion of his blood over the course of a planting season, leaving him weakened precisely when he required peak physical condition for agricultural labor. The archaeological findings paint a heart-wrenching picture. Commoner burials frequently reveal skeletal remains exhibiting pitting from chronic anemia. The skeletons of children frequently display growth interruptions that align with the established bloodletting schedules. Adult remains often show signs of arthritis in joints that bore the strain of weakness induced by blood loss. The Maya people were, quite literally, bleeding themselves towards premature graves, their bodies depleted by the relentless imposition of cosmic taxation. The most insidious element was the normalization of this practice. An individual would no more question the necessity of anointing their corn seeds with blood than a modern person would question the obligation to settle their electricity bill. It was simply the established order of the universe. Bloodletting was as routine as breathing, as vital as sustenance. To abstain from it was to be perceived as a cosmic freeloader, pilfering existence without rendering the required payment. The cumulative daily toll was staggering. If an individual offered 3 drops of blood per corn seed and planted 100 seeds daily during the planting season, in addition to their morning libations, pre-meal thanksgiving, and tool blessings before commencing work, they could easily lose a cup of blood weekly simply to maintain their basic existence. When this volume is multiplied by every adult inhabitant of a city, the commoner blood tax far exceeded the volume of noble sacrifices. Yet blood alone was insufficient. They required chemical catalysts to unlock the celestial gateways. The venom of toads, combined with morning glory seeds, yielded a potent concoction that would undoubtedly alarm even contemporary psychonauts. The Maya did not haphazardly experiment with flora in the hope of inducing visions. They were accomplished psychopharmacologists who had meticulously mapped the chemical pathways to divine realms with scientific accuracy. Within the temple laboratories of Palenque, priestly chemists cultivated specific strains of morning glory engineered for maximum lysergic acid content. They carefully milked bufonides during particular lunar phases when their venom glands produced the most potent 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine. This was not rudimentary shamanism. It was sophisticated neurochemical engineering. The formulation for their standard Vision Quest brew was as precise as any modern pharmaceutical prescription. 13 morning glory seeds, crushed but not pulverized, the fresh venom of 1 adult male bufonade, 3 dried mushrooms of the Psilocybe mexicana variety, wild tobacco, concentrated through repeated boiling, and balsamic bark, fermented for precisely 9 days. When prepared incorrectly, the mixture merely induced hallucinations. When mixed with the correct proportions, it served as a reliable technology for accessing otherworldly dimensions. However, the ingestibles were merely the initial step. The preparation of the body was as crucial as the preparation of the chemical agents. 20 days of fasting reduced the supplicant to a state where the blood-brain barrier became permeable. Sexual abstinence built up seminal energy that could be explosively released during the visionary experience. Most critically, the systematic bloodletting preceding ingestion induced a state of hypovolemic shock, amplifying the psychedelic effects exponentially. This is where the narrative descends into true darkness. The Maya discovered that pain itself possessed psychedelic properties. The endorphins released during bloodletting produced an altered state upon which external chemicals could build. They meticulously charted the timing, piercing the penis or tongue first, allowing the endorphin surge to reach its peak, and then ingesting the brew. While the body's endogenous painkillers generated internal hallucinations, the synergy of external and internal agents resulted in experiences that profoundly fractured ordinary consciousness. Lord Smoking Squirrel's vision quest adhered to protocols refined over centuries. It began with isolation in a subterranean chamber, a process of sensory deprivation designed to erode the boundaries between the self and the cosmos. This was followed by bloodletting, timed precisely according to lunar cycles and planetary alignments. As his blood flowed, the initial preparation, a concentrated form of wild tobacco, was placed beneath his tongue, initiating a dissociative state. 20 minutes later, as the nicotine reached its apex, the mixture of morning glory and toad venom was consumed. The fate of the kingdom, and indeed, it was entirely predictable. The Maya had charted the progression of the divine journey with the same meticulousness as astronomers charting celestial movements. First came the serpents, invariably the serpents. Visionary serpents born from blood and smoke, their scales adorned with stars, their mouths articulating in mathematical equations, followed by jaguars, representing the nocturnal sun's passage through the underworld. Finally, if the dosage and timing were meticulously adhered to, came direct communion with the deities themselves. But these were not random hallucinations. The Maya had ascertained that specific combinations of psychoactive substances reliably elicited specific visions. Toad venom and morning glory, when combined, invariably conjured Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Psilocybin mushrooms and wild tobacco opened channels to Cha, the rain god, while Datura, coupled with blood loss, was linked to the death gods of Xibalba. They had effectively engineered a chemical telecommunications system to the divine realms. This precision extended to the content of the visions. Priests meticulously recorded thousands of trip reports, noting recurring patterns and correlations. They discovered that fasting for precisely 20 days yielded visions of the future. 25 days brought forth visions of the past. 30 days opened portals to alternate realities where different choices had been made. This was not born of mysticism, but of empirical observation honed over generations. The psychedelic technology provided a solution to a fundamental quandary in Maya theology. If the gods demanded continuous blood tribute, how could humans ascertain they were appeasing the correct deities in the proper manner? The psychoactive substances offered a form of quality control during the visionary encounters. Gods could communicate directly, advising adjustments to sacrifice schedules, specifying desired blood types, and offering agricultural guidance. This chemical interface facilitated a real-time cosmic customer service operation. However, this advanced technology exacted a grim toll. The combination of blood loss, fasting, and potent psychedelics produced experiences so overwhelming that many individuals never fully reintegrated into baseline reality. The Maya had a term, Naru, referring to those who had plunged too deeply into the divine currents. Priests who overindulged in these sacred elixirs developed what might be recognized today as persistent hallucinogenic perception disorder. Incapable of distinguishing everyday reality from the superimposed cosmic overlay, a pharmacological arms race ensued as tolerance levels escalated. What once required a mere handful of morning glory seeds eventually demanded hundreds. Priests began incorporating increasingly hazardous additives: mercury extracted from cinnabar, venom from toxic toad species, and concentrated datura, which proved fatal as often as it induced enlightenment. The relentless pursuit of more profound divine connections led to a pharmacological extremism that mirrored the escalation of blood sacrifice. The most disconcerting revelation was that the efficacy of these substances was enhanced by fresher blood. The Maya learned that ingesting psychedelics immediately after bloodletting, while the wounds were still actively bleeding, produced the most vivid and consistent visions. This practice led to simultaneous bloodletting and drug ingestion. Participants would hallucinate while actively mutilating themselves, the pain and the visions becoming inextricably intertwined. Armed with blood, hallucinogens, and a pervasive sense of desperation, the Maya entered their final cataclysmic centuries. In the concluding days of Copan, the sacrificial altars flowed so profusely with blood that priests found themselves slipping on the slick stones. The magnificent city, renowned for its mastery of sacrificial mathematics, was literally drowning in its own ritualistic effusions. King Smoke Shell had been deceased for 3 years, yet the practice of bloodletting persisted under a succession of increasingly desperate rulers. The meticulously planned ritualistic schedules had devolved into a state of perpetual sacrifice. The pyramid steps, once ascended with profound reverence, were now transformed into gauntlets for bodies cascading downwards with assembly line efficiency. The archaeological evidence from Copan's final occupation phase chronicles a descent into civilizational madness. Ritualistic deposits dating to 850 CE reveal a chaotic amalgam of human remains, nobles intermingled with commoners, adults alongside children, and a grim transition from careful dismemberment to crude hacking, indicative of frenzied butchery. The sacred had been perverted into the profane. The act of cosmic maintenance had devolved into cosmic vandalism. Copan, however, was not an anomaly. Across the Maya realms, a strikingly similar pattern unfolded, albeit with local variations. In Tikal, the response was one of grandiosity and denial. Even as the population dwindled and the water reservoirs ran dry, King Jasur Chan Kawil III commissioned increasingly monumental structures, proclaiming divine favor. The city's final dated stele, from 869 CE, depicts the king engaged in penile bloodletting while standing atop a pyramid of skulls that pierces the heavens. The carving itself is exquisite, yet the city surrounding it was already desolate. Palenque attempted theological innovation. If traditional bloodletting practices proved ineffective, perhaps the deities desired something novel. The priests commenced experimenting with new forms of sacrifice, drowning in quicksand, slow roasting over sacred fires, and elaborate flaying ceremonies that spanned days to complete. Each novel approach yielded a brief respite of false hope, only to ultimately fail, much like its predecessors. The gods remained unimpressed. This is where the narrative takes a truly grim turn. Some cities resorted to ritualistic cannibalism, not merely sacrificing their own populace, but consuming them in a desperate, self-perpetuating cycle. Nobles consumed nobles. Priests consumed priests. The societal hierarchy that had structured Maya civilization for a millennium dissolved into a ravenous feeding frenzy, where anyone possessing blood became potential cosmic sustenance. The demise of Karakol was perhaps the most lamentable. The city simply surrendered. The final inscriptions trail off incompletely, not as a result of violence, but of sheer exhaustion. The priests ceased recording dates. The kings abandoned their claims of victory. The bloodletting altars were forsaken, not out of newfound enlightenment, but from a grim realization that the universe itself had already expired, and they were merely performing meaningless motions like spectral entities. Climate data indicates that the drought finally broke around 900 CE. However, by that juncture, it was tragically too late. The theological damage was irreversible. How does one reconstruct a civilization founded upon blood sacrifice when that very foundation has demonstrably crumbled? How does one restore faith in deities who permit their most devoted adherents to perish from starvation? The Maya faced not only environmental devastation, but also a complete cosmological bankruptcy. The abandonment occurred in waves. Initially, it was the farmers, fleeing both the gnawing pangs of hunger and the conscription for sacrificial rituals. Subsequently, it was the artisans, their skills rendered obsolete in cities solely preoccupied with feeding the altars. The merchants followed suit as trade routes became increasingly perilous due to desperate cities preying upon travelers for sacrificial victims. Finally, even the priests relinquished their posts, leaving behind only the most fanatical or the irrevocably insane. What they discovered in those final years shattered their fundamental beliefs. The universe did not require their blood. After all, the sun rose independently of their sacrifices. The rain arrived, or failed to arrive, irrespective of their suffering. The cosmic machinery they had diligently maintained for a millennium had either never existed or had discovered an alternative power source. The Maya had, in essence, bled themselves into oblivion for naught. The final hieroglyphic texts are profoundly heart-rending in their bewilderment. Scribes who had once recorded confident pronouncements of divine favor now etched questions into stone. Why have the gods turned away? What offering have we neglected? When will the blood offerings finally suffice? The last dated monument in the entirety of the Maya lowlands, originating from Tonina and dating to 999 CE, does not commemorate a king's triumph or a deity's satisfaction. It simply records the conclusion of the Khan. Time itself had lost all meaning. The cities did not succumb to violent ends. They simply faded away. The final inhabitants of Copan subsisted within the ruins of its once grand palaces, utilizing furniture as fuel for warmth, too utterly depleted for either hope or despair. The last residents of Tikal were likely squatters who no longer recalled the original purpose of the towering pyramids. The colossal bloodletting altars became nesting sites for avian life. The skull wrecks, once symbols of ritualistic power, succumbed to decay, scattering their skeletal contents into anonymous bone fields. Yet the underlying theology did not perish. It retreated, transformed, and burrowed underground. In the highland regions of Guatemala, in communities such as San Juan Chamula, modified versions of blood payment persist. Modern Maya individuals still prick their ears prior to planting. They retain the conviction that cosmic debts necessitate tangible atonement. The worldview of a universe as a decaying mechanism proved more resilient than the civilization that engendered it. The collapse of the Maya civilization was not precipitated by warfare, disease, or external invasion. It was an act of theological self-annihilation, a civilization that believed the maintenance of the cosmos hinged upon suffering, ultimately amplified that suffering to the point of its own demise. The feedback loop they established, more predicaments demanding more blood, which in turn engendered further predicaments, became a serpent consuming its own tail, a cosmic Ouroboros that devoured everything the Maya had painstakingly constructed. This brings us back to that particular temple, that young boy undergoing his 7th piercing of the flesh. Prince Amna withdrew the 7th spine, blood coursing in rivulets down his thighs. Now, however, we grasp the gravity of what hung in the balance. This was not merely a prince demonstrating his virility or asserting his claim to the throne. This was a 16-year-old boy bearing the crushing weight of a dying universe upon his young shoulders. His blood, the sole currency accepted by deities whose insatiable hunger had already consumed 1,000 cities. Each drop that descended onto the bark paper below represented a payment against an immeasurable debt, a sacrifice offered to entities that might not even exist. The rope commenced its arduous passage through the wounds the spines had meticulously carved. We now perceive him not as a primitive savage, but as a young man ensnared within a theological prison constructed by 40 generations of his ancestors. Every meter of thorny rope that traversed his flesh was a plea for rain that might not materialize, for crops that might falter regardless, for a sunrise that would inevitably occur whether he bled or not. The priests observing him were not sadistic tormentors, but fervent believers, as convinced of blood's cosmic necessity as we are of gravity's immutable pull. They interpreted the patterns within his flowing blood with the same unwavering certainty with which we interpret weather satellite data. If he persevered, if the gods accepted his offering, perhaps Copan could elude the fate that had already claimed Tikal, Palenque, and Karakul. Perhaps this time the payment would finally prove sufficient. Yet we are privy to the conclusion of this narrative. Within a single generation, Copan, too, would become deserted, its altars abandoned, its pyramids silenced. The blood of Amna, much like the blood of millions who preceded him, would merely secure a transient reprieve from an inevitable collapse that was theological in nature rather than preventable. The Maya had forged a worldview where the sole recourse to suffering was an augmentation of it, where the only response to divine veracity was the offering of human flesh. The horrifying logic of Maya bloodletting is embedded within its very structure. Every action was rational within their cosmological framework. If one genuinely believed the universe was in a state of terminal decline, and that human suffering held the key to its revitalization, then their actions were not merely reasonable, but profoundly heroic. They were willing to pay the ultimate price to ensure the very continuity of existence. The modern Maya still bear the lingering effects of this ancient burden. In San Juan Chamula, chickens are sacrificed within churches to appease saints who bear the visages of both Catholic and pagan figures. In the Guatemalan highlands, farmers continue to mix blood with their corn seeds. It is merely a single drop now, a cultural echo of a time when the required tribute was vastly greater. The universe's famished deity never truly perished. It simply adapted to subsist on smaller sustenance. What the ancient Maya discovered, or at least believed they had discovered, was that pain could be transmuted into power and suffering into cosmic fuel. They erected a civilization upon this foundational principle, honed it into a sophisticated art form, and ultimately allowed it to consume them entirely. Their blood-soaked theology represented perhaps humanity's most elaborate endeavor to negotiate with an indifferent universe through the medium of suffering. Prince Amna completed his ritual. The rope emerged from the final wound, slick with blood and adorned with barely discernible shreds of flesh. He had endured. For the present moment, the gods were appeased. He would ascend to kingship, guiding Copan through its final decades, and ultimately preside over the abandonment of everything his bloodletting was intended to preserve. The Maya imparted a profound lesson regarding the transformative power of belief in shaping perceived reality. They demonstrated that humans are capable of enduring virtually any hardship when convinced it serves a higher purpose. They illustrated how entire civilizations can be constructed upon the bedrock of ritualized suffering. Most disturbingly, they proved that such civilizations can function, even flourish, for over a millennium. Their ritualistic sexual sacrifices were not aberrations, but rather logical outcomes of a worldview that perceived the cosmos as fundamentally flawed, requiring constant repair through human agony. Every pierced penis, every mutilated tongue, every extracted heart represented an attempt to rectify something that may never have been broken in the first place. Stingray spines now reside in museums. Bloodletting altars serve only as tourist attractions. Skull racks have been meticulously catalogued by archaeologists who can quantify the skeletal remains, but can never truly comprehend the depth of conviction that placed them there. We regard the Maya blood sacrifices with a mixture of horror and fascination, perceiving within them a darkness we assure ourselves we have long since transcended. But have we truly? Or have we simply discovered new altars, new methods of settling imagined debts owed to self-fashioned, ravenous deities? At least the Maya were forthright about the cost of their convictions. They carved it into stone, painted it onto pottery, and proclaimed it from atop their pyramids. They revealed the consequences when humanity convinces itself that suffering is sacred, that pain possesses cosmic significance, and that the universe is powered by blood. Prince Itna rose from the altar, transformed by agony into divine kingship. His blood had purchased another day, another season, another year of maintaining the illusion that the cosmic machinery remained operational. He could not have foreseen that he was among the last to pay such a price, that the altars would soon fall silent and the gods would be compelled to seek alternative sustenance or admit they had never been truly hungry at all. The most gruesome sexual practices of the Maya were not rooted in sexuality or even sacrifice itself. They were a testament to the terrifying capacity of belief to transmute human bodies into cosmic currency, to forge logic from madness, and to erect entire civilizations upon foundations of blood that would ultimately be washed away by the very rains they were intended to summon.